Alrighty, welcome back to the Whoville Marathon, the end of our
Hello.
Christmas holiday marathon that ends after
Yay!
Christmas. Hope everyone had a good
We're
holiday.
overachievers. We're
Yeah.
gonna keep that holiday spirit going with
Heck yeah.
the Grinch.
Heck yes. Holiday spirit with the Grinch. And for our last episode of the year is
Yeah.
the Grinch. Didn't think that
Uh-huh.
through entirely,
The
but
last
I'm fine
last
with it.
3 episodes of the year.
Are the Grinch. Yes, we are on The Grinch, the 2018 version by Illumination Studios, directed by Scott Moiser and Yarrow Cheney, I believe. Starring Benedict Cumberbatch and what is it? Sheeta Jones and whoever the kid is that voices Cindy Lou Who.
That's
Good
who
for them.
that was.
I think that's who that
Okay.
was. I could check. I
Yeah,
have
no,
my phone.
feel free to double check because I don't I wouldn't swear to it necessarily, but the mom's voice was like comforting and
It
familiar,
is.
and it's
Yes, it
because
is. It is. Rashida Jones and
Parks and Rec.
Cameron Seeley. Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, little person. Cindy Lou Who. So, yeah. I need to say something real quick.
Mm,
Okay, just give me a second here.
okay. You have a space.
Thank you. I'm going to say some things that are not kind about this movie. Give me a second. Give me a second.
Okay. Uh-huh.
However,
Mm.
I realize that this is definitely more so, I think, than any other movie we've watched, really. This is a kids' movie.
Uh-huh.
There's little need to approach it that aggressively. I'm
Mhm.
gonna end up doing it anyway. Just understand that I have the understanding of what this movie actually is. At the end of the day, I think it was very sweet. And I do want to talk about the ending quite a bit, actually. Um, I think it's fun. I think kids will like it. I don't. I didn't hate it as much as I remembered hating it the first time
Oh,
I had
you've seen it
watched it.
before.
I'd seen
I've
part
not
of it
seen it
before.
before.
I had not finished it, so I did not know how it ends. Um, I think there was some fun sweetness to be taken away from this movie, and I understand
Mhm.
it is for kids.
Mhm.
That being said, I have a lot of just unnecessary, bitter, nitpicky bullshit that I want to complain about
Gonna
continuously for the
out-Grinch
next.
the Grinch.
Yeah, I am for
Okay.
like the next 45 minutes. That all that being said, though, what are your initial takeaways?
Um,
Did we say Andrew and Mack? I'm Andrew, you're Mac. Did we say that? I can't recall. I'm
I'm
sorry.
Mac.
I'm Andrew.
We
Cool.
have now.
There we go. Your
Um,
thoughts.
if the original Grinch is like the perfect cup of hot chocolate, like just like it's a good little 30-minute compact story filled with sweetness, but it's not too sweet. Like it's just a solid little cartoon, right? Then the live action one is like,
It's a Jack and Coke.
yes, exactly. I was gonna say let's put some alcohol in that hot chocolate, but
Spiked
it's still
eggnog.
like good, you know? This
Oh, it's
one
real
is
good. It goes
like
down real smooth.
this one is like we tried to make hot chocolate, but all we had was like Hershey syrup and water. And
Ew. But yeah,
like
yeah.
it has the same core ingredients, but it's not
It's not as
as
good.
thought out or as good as the other two are. And what's weird about it is, yeah, it's definitely built for kids more so than the live action one is, I would argue. Sure,
Hmm.
kids can enjoy the live action one, but there's way too much going on in that live action one for like
Yeah,
genuine kids to really get it and enjoy it.
yeah.
This one, like young kids through like slightly older elementary age kids probably enjoy this film. It's got lots of fun things. The
Hmm.
character arcs are a little bit easier and more transparent to see.
Hmm.
Things are a little bit more paced out better. It has things that probably resonate with them a little bit better. And I will say, I don't feel like it's horrible. It just has a really high expectation that comes with the Grinch, because that first cartoon is so good, and then the second one, while more complicated, also has like a high standard of execution and quality to it. It's weird at times, but it has a really like it adds an interesting social analysis on top of the Grinch story and doesn't manage to totally mess it up, right? This one is just the Grinch, but in brighter colors
Yeah.
and over 90 minutes. Like it doesn't really add anything to the story and it doesn't really take anything away from the story. It
Not
just
really, yeah.
puts in some extra content. And I'll be honest, I like Benedict Cumberbatch, but I don't think he was the right casting
Thank
choice
you. I
for
was going to
this.
say the same thing. And I have to say this because I've said it every episode. You know my thoughts on the potential of a Grinch horror movie. Now, I understood when this was announced back in the day. I understand, okay? Just let me finish.
No.
Let me finish. I knew that with Illumination it wasn't going to be a full-blown horror movie, but when they cast Benedict Cumberbatch, I was like, oh, cool, we're going to have some fun with like a spooky Grinch again. Like the cartoon, he was a mean, aggressive, spooky-ish Grinch, because why else would you cast the voice of Dormammu and Smaug and not do something with his fantastic, deep, gross, creepy Sherlock voice? That could have been anybody. I don't know why they did that. Like, he doesn't even have a British accent, and he could have. There's no reason he didn't need to. Like, I don't know why they did that. I really don't.
It's odd listening to his voice in it because, like, I generally love Benedict Cumberbatch. Smaug, I think he gives a fantastic performance,
he
right?
has a very
and like
noticeable, like, powerful voice when he wants to. That I could have done this.
It feels like they wanted the Grinch to be just a guy, and they ended up choosing someone who would have been much better at the more extreme version of the character.
Yeah.
And because they watered him down, it's odd because it's like, I mean, the comparison I'm drawing is probably because he plays an organ, but it's like casting someone who is really good at playing the Phantom in Phantom of the Opera and then asking him just be an average Joe in the movie. And even if they were going to make him a little bit spookier, they probably could have gotten somebody better than Benedict Cumberbatch. Again, I like Benedict Cumberbatch, but his voice intonation is wrong for the Grinch. For the Grinch, we want a voice that sounds old and frustrated, and Cumberbatch has just a very crisp diction to what he says. He doesn't have any of the lower tones, or at least like the way he played this Grinch, he didn't use any of them.
Right. Well,
So I don't think they're natural. It's.
I think you're thinking
it worked.
Yeah, I think you're thinking that Benedict wouldn't work in this movie as it is, and you're right. Like, I'm thinking the whole movie needs to be revamped for him, because like his voice in Sherlock could work perfectly as the Grinch, but like in a darker, different story. Like, you can't have him being the Grinch with his deeper natural voice and then have Cindy Lou Who running around with her backpack full of waffles. Like, the tone is going to be too off, and you're absolutely right. Like, that's not going to work. So like, I thought it was going to be a completely different kind of story than what it ended up being. So
it's like a coloring book version of the story. I mean, what even was the Fred storyline? Like, I get conceptually what they were trying to do with Fred, but like, why have him in the first place?
It's nothing.
It's nothing.
And I thought the same thing, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because I've gotten some shit from you in some of our episodes where like you get on me for commenting on these kids movies and their nothingness. So I'm glad that we're on the same page with this one, because this movie does the same thing that the Jim Carrey one does, which is add additional story, additional content, additional plots. But in the Jim Carrey one, they feel more interesting, they feel more relevant, they drive the story. This one, they go nowhere and do nothing, and they feel pointless and redundant. And I don't know. I don't know why we had to do the Fred thing. It's like, well, because Fred saves the day in the end. I don't like that they do that. I really don't like that they do that, because it takes away from one of the coolest moments of the Grinch story, is him having fucking super strength. And like, I think if you wanted to play with it and still have him fall over the edge, have him climb up the rope, one hand at a time, all dramatic. Like, but no, the family of reindeer save
it's the
toys.
idea that he's not genuinely alone, right? Fred is supposed to play the role that Cindy Lou Who does in the live action. But honestly, my biggest complaint, I think, is this movie follows more of the original's idea that the Grinch and Cindy Lou Who have this tiny interaction, and that's enough to sort of impact the way that the Grinch sees things. I mean, obviously, it's not like it's an instantaneous change, but it suggested that interaction between the Grinch and this super sweet little girl influences the way he thinks about Christmas.
I like that. I do in this one a lot, honestly.
I think this movie fails to take advantage of the fact that Cindy Lou Who and the Grinch having a standing relationship in the live action makes the story better. I think in particular with Cindy Lou Who, not that I'm saying they should do the exact same thing, but the live action did such a good job of crafting this, Cindy Lou Who's looking for the meaning of Christmas, and the Grinch has already given up on Christmas. And you put the two of them in a room together, and you have them figure out their problems. It's redefined the way we think about the Grinch, or at least the way that I think about the Grinch story, because I almost forgot that in the original, it's just a momentary meeting between the two of them, and they actually don't speak again. And I feel like it's a loss in this longer form version of the story that we see Cindy's story as so separate from the Grinch's story. And I don't know if maybe that's just because it's the way I've seen it and I like that version, so I'm being preferential, or if it's like the story is actually better when you tie these two main characters in a closer story.
I don't know. I did not spend the brain power trying to think of how I would do this one differently. I just feel that I don't like what they did with this, because I don't think the Cindy Lou Who thing in this movie and the Grinch thing mix, kind of like what you said. But I do like the ending a lot. But I think the Cindy Lou Who thing in this movie is too heavy, and this Grinch is the lightest of the Grinches that we've ever had. Of these three. Like, Cindy Lou, like, there's nothing overly dramatic or adult about Cindy Lou Who's thing. Her whole story or arc or whatever, her goal is to lighten the load of her mom, which is like the realest thing that we've gotten from any of these Illumination Dr. Seuss stories. Like, this overworked single parent, like, that's really interesting and very sweet of Cindy Lou Who. But then on the flip side of that, we have the Grinch in his cave with his fat reindeer and his dog with his mechanical weirdness, and he's exercising and stuffing his face with cake, and like, it's just, there's like this weirdly mature.
He even has moments where he apologizes to Max. Like, early in the first half of the story, he's apologizing to Max, and it's, if you're gonna make him more dynamic than we've presented before, okay, but then you have to figure out a way to take him. And this movie seems to suggest that the Grinch is actually a perfectly fine person. He just hates Christmas because he has trauma about being alone on Christmas.
Yeah.
And that's not enough to explain who the Grinch is.
I wanted to talk about that as well, because I think this movie fails at capturing the Grinch essence quite a bit, because the first one implies loosely, I think, that this motherfucker is basically a Yeti. Like, the Whoville may not even know he exists. He's this entity up in the mountains. There is no origin story. There is no background. He is just there, being a fucking creeper. The next one, Whoville have Alphabud his ass, and because he's green and because he's mean, he's a monster and everyone hates him and no one can talk about him. He's a taboo and he hates them, and they illustrate how he only has stuff because he lives next to their dump. He is so hated and hates them so much that when he goes into town, he's in disguise. And then in this one, he's basically the grumpy neighbor that just doesn't want anyone on his lawn for no reason.
See, what's interesting is, in my mind, especially the original, but also a little bit the live action, the Grinch is an analogy for that grumpy old neighbor who's been left on his own and isn't a part of the community. But it's only because it's pushed to its comic extreme does it make such a good story, in my opinion. You can have the sweet story about trying to loop in your, elderly neighbor and make it very grounded and sweet. But we're in Whoville. You got to turn things up a little bit.
Yes.
For the kid, thinking about things from like a kid's perspective, a kid's lens, the Grinch has to be at least a little bit scary because you don't know anything about him. He's this looming figure who probably yells at you from a distance. Like, you have to build up the prejudice, the reputation of the Grinch before you can disarm him. And in this one, they're like, he's just a guy who's scared of Christmas.
Right.
And also is sometimes mean, but then apologizes for it.
Yeah.
So he's just a guy who has a quirk.
And his meanness is honestly so pathetic that Whoville doesn't even care.
Yeah, Whoville has no idea who this guy is. And it's not because he's a Yeti out in the mountains. It's because he's just so unremarkable. Sure, he's green, but no one says a single thing about it.
No, not at all. That's the other thing. I want to hold off on that. Whoville itself. I want to put a pin in that. But the Grinch, he just goes into town to get groceries, which for one I didn't love, because again, you put in enough thought that the Grinch will need food, and to get food he has to go into town, and narratively that shows us how the dynamic is between the Grinch and Whoville. Look at us thinking. It's like, okay, well then where does he get his NASA level laboratory equipment that he just has throughout this cave, because he doesn't have an income? It's like, well, it's not that kind of movie. It's like, okay, you're picking and choosing here, man. Like, what is and isn't something that we're going to question. Because that was another thing, honestly, that I wanted to bring up. They make it, I think, abundantly clear with visual storytelling that the Grinch in the animated and the live action one is living in miserable miserable environment. It is uncomfortable. It is unfriendly. It is gross. I would cut off my left foot for this dude's apartment because it's spacious.
You wouldn't need it.
Exactly. But it's spacious and beautiful. Like, his cave setup in this movie is amazing. And he has this delightful little dog that makes him coffee every morning. Like, this dude has it made. And when I had forgotten how this movie ends, I thought they were going to do this thing where they were going to make the Grinch just a guy who just wants to be left alone. He just wants space. He just wants to be alone. And it's the exact opposite. So, I don't know. Like,
how do I want to put this? I would say the choice to have him interact on a more social level with the Who's, I don't totally hate. I just think it's extremely poorly executed. I kind of like this idea that he has this one-sided rivalry with one of his neighbors. I kind of like the idea that he would plan to avoid going to get groceries. I see what you're saying about resources and how he just has a whole mad scientist lab in the basement, but he ran out of groceries. That doesn't make sense. But I like character-wise that he planned grocery shopping so that he wouldn't have to go into town in the whole month of December, so he wouldn't have to deal with Christmas. I like the fact that it is supposed to all stem from the fact that when he was an orphan, he was alone. No one was ever there for him, so he just kind of got used to that. The problem is that it's not... again, they don't build it up and then show it to us. It's just a relatively kind of grumpy, isolated guy who we don't totally understand why he's isolating himself.
Right.
And it leans too hard on our like previous conceptions of the Grinch. And then with that moment where he's like in the Christmas celebration and he's having like flashbacks to the fact that he never got that
That was a
in an
little,
orphanage.
I think, overly dramatic.
Yeah, I don't want to speak from a position of authority on that because I don't know enough about like PTSD or like trauma you might have from being an orphan in an orphanage, you know. But I don't think that was fairly portrayed.
I don't either.
There,
I
as someone who has had periods of loneliness in my life,
yeah.
like
I
that's not what it feels like.
No. I don't think it was illustrated well. I fully agree with you. I think if I don't love their explanation for his hate of Christmas to begin with, but let's say it's fine. Let's go with it. The loneliness, the lack of an experience of Christmas with people. To be in a situation of Christmas like that wouldn't result, I would feel, in a more PTSD style situation. It would be a sense of overwhelming or a sense of indifference and annoyance, but it's not in this movie. That's not what they portray. That's not what they show him experiencing, and it doesn't line up with what he had. Like to
It
see,
wouldn't necessarily translate to joy. Like, you know, it's not like you never knew what cake tasted like till you had it and then you like got addicted. It's not like that.
Mhm.
But it's also not like you're reliving a battle.
Right?
You know, it's not flashback heavy. It's just like there's a level of confusion or disorientation or like maybe even extreme loneliness would strike again because you don't feel like he's not there with anyone. There's
Mhm.
no one there who's looking at him or caring for him in that moment, but everyone else has somebody.
Right.
So if we wanted to portray the fact that his loneliness is striking him when everyone else seems to be having a really good time, you want to play up the fact that everyone's holding hands or hugging someone or dancing together and
Mhm.
it's just him on his own
Right.
feeling alone.
So that brings me to another part. I don't like the loneliness aspect of this. I think that it's like the weakest evil villain origin story thing they could have picked because okay, sorry, I need to organize my thoughts. I'm gonna go backwards. I like the ending quite a bit. I like
Mhm.
how Cindy invites him to Christmas dinner. I like seeing him interact with the Who's in a very normal way that we don't get from either of the other movies. It's like the least cartoony version of an interaction with the Who's, which I can appreciate. However, the weight of that moment in the ending is that that's his first Christmas party. The first time he was invited to a Christmas party. You can't tell me that this is the first time he was invited to a Christmas party if he's got this neighbor who throws parties and loves the guy. You mentioned you like this one-sided rivalry. I hate it because it undercuts, I think, the only good thing of this movie, which is the ending. There's no way he was never invited to something by this guy in particular. And it reminds me of that moment in Meet the Robinsons when the bowler hat guy is telling his villain origin story and he's like, no one liked me in school, and it shows him walking through the hallways like, hey Goop, nice binder. Hey Goop, you want to come to my house today? They all hated me. It's like, there's no one's even hating you, dude. No one.
Mhm.
So like, it's weird that this is the third Grinch and not the second, because we already had a movie that somehow understood if we're gonna expand on the Grinch and have him isolated, quote unquote, a mile away from a town of extroverts who love to celebrate holidays, there needs to be some sort of reason as to why they all hate him or want to separate from him for the loneliness to make any sense. Like, it does not make sense. Like, he's not quite complaining, but he is dealing with the quote-unquote trauma of being lonely when his next door neighbor is the friendliest guy you're gonna meet. It doesn't make sense in the end for this Cindy Lou Who invitation to have the weight that it does, and it should, when all the other Who's are just really kind to him.
I want to reiterate before I get into my point that I also really liked the ending. Like, regardless of the fact the rest of the movie kind of very
Blows.
mid or under expectation,
Yeah.
um, the end, I almost got like a little teary eyed because like
Same.
it's
I did too.
super sweet.
It is.
Execution at
It
the end
is.
is very sweet.
It's genuine.
You're right. The rest of the film does not back it up. Um, if they wanted to tell the story of a self-imposed isolation, he's not a social outcast. He just doesn't trust people and doesn't want to build relationships. Then he needed something more than just not having any in the past. He needed to have
Mm-hmm.
been burned by somebody, beliefs
Yes.
that could lead to betrayal, right?
Yes.
And then we would have something.
Mm-hmm.
But just this idea that you've been lonely before, and so you decide that it's better to be that way, it doesn't make any sense. Like there's no logic to like why he thinks he needs to be alone. And it's funny because other kids movies, I'm not doing a great job of thinking of examples right now, but I've seen other kids movies approach this topic. This idea that I have been hurt and betrayed before and therefore I will not trust anyone. And usually it's our main character who has to try and like convince that person like, "Hey, I am going to do my best to make you trust me and I'm going to do my best to make sure that I deserve that trust." And that person learns to build relationships again. That's the story that they're telling. They just left out the key part that makes the person like distrust others. The
Mm-hmm.
betrayal part. You have to have that part in order for things to go. Like dude, if all they included, and it would have been a little dark, but if all they included was that his parents left him at the
On
orphanage
Christmas. Ooh.
on Christmas, then that would be enough to establish a lifelong belief
Mm-hmm.
that people will betray you and leave you behind, and then it would be closely associated with Christmas.
Yeah.
That's all this movie needed to really make that character choice make
Mm-hmm.
sense. But as it is, it's just a toothless Grinch who's not actually like a problem. He
Mm-hmm.
just, for some reason, doesn't have any relationships and hates Christmas, and we're not given any real reason as to it. Even the original Grinch, it interferes with his life, right? He's a little grouchy and he has the wrong perspective on things, but you can kind of understand why he would be irritated. It's noisy. They seem too self-centered. It's not about me. I'm done with it. In this one, he has a palace
Mm-hmm.
that nobody can really invade. I'm going to go ahead and assume it's more or less soundproof because nobody in Whoville
Uh-huh.
hears his organ.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And like I don't
What's the
like
deal?
why does he hate
Yeah,
Christmas?
what's the
It's
problem?
not good enough.
Yeah. But see, at the same time, they go, I think, too hard on his only like character element, or I've used that I said that wrong. His like, the only character trait is that he hates Christmas and he's lonely. But again, because they didn't illustrate the origin of the hate for Christmas very well, and Whoville doesn't hate him, this whole thing only works in December. Because what's wrong in May? What's the
Yeah.
prob
Does
what's
he
the
go to like the
problem?
4th of July parade with him or
Yeah,
something?
like
Like
what's the deal? What's the deal the rest of the year? Why can't you go out then? What do you hate then? Like you hate like, and he says the line something along the lines of like, I hated Christmas and I thought I hated everyone, or I didn't hate everyone. I was dealing with I don't know what exactly what he says. It's like a yada yada as to why I stay away from everyone else. It doesn't make sense, I don't think, or it's not used well, and it's unfortunate.
especially the end, because the end feels like it really could have been something.
Yeah,
But the
absolutely.
rest of the movie is just, I mean, I think the perfect example is kind of what we talked about with Fred. Like, there's this whole storyline about going out to get reindeer for the sleigh. All they can find is Fred, and it's this big fat character they play with for a bit. Like, it's the body size and everything. They make several physical cartoonish jokes, and then Fred sees his family, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And the Grinch has a soft moment where he lets him go be with his family, which would then communicate that he understands the importance of familial relationships and does
Right.
support them, at least for other people. But no, he's still a Grinch. He hasn't had that change of heart yet. Like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't nothing really lines up. Nothing really makes sense. There is some intention behind it. And I guess you could say some like art involved as well, because it does look very clean. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it doesn't feel like a Grinch story, and it doesn't feel super intentional.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. And I agree on both fronts. I think as a positive, I think the animation is very clean and I like the style. It's very well done. That one scene at night when the snow is in his fur, not the funny one where he's got icicles in his fur, when he's standing on the top of Mount Crumpet and there's like the white powder and the green fur. Gorgeous. Like, gorgeous. Really, really well done.
I liked the lighting and the light moves.
Yes.
That was fun.
Yes. And I like the interpretation of the inside with the heart. I thought that was an interesting way to do that. It was very, very whimsical and fun. I like, the style of Whoville is fine. Very enjoyable. But segueing into Whoville, I like, again, looking back, that even though I don't like how they do it, I like that both the Grinch and Whoville have something to learn in the live action Grinch. That is not present here. There is not a flaw with Whoville. You could probably get into some sort of specifics about, maybe a little less caffeine in that cocoa. You guys are a little much sometimes. That's an element of Whoville, though. Like, we don't have the avarice thing. We don't have the overzealous, superfluous spending thing. We just have these lovely people having a lovely time, having fun during the holidays. There's a little bit of potential commentary on Cindy Lou Who's situation, but we don't ever get into that on a grander scale. The other Who's don't acknowledge that. Like, they acknowledge she's busy, but there's, like, no help or anything there. It's just people existing, having fun. And I think that, again, it makes it feel more shallow because, again, I thought they almost went down this path, I feel like, and it would have completely undercut the ending of the Grinch story in general. But it looked like they might have been going this route of, I just don't like Christmas. I don't want to do anything with Christmas. And Whoville won't leave that alone. They're pushing Christmas. It has to be. You have kind of like Christmas with the Cranks. People, I think, kind of miss the point, or like this accidental point with Christmas with the Cranks, which is it's individuals' business whether or not they want to celebrate Christmas for whatever reason. It's not up to the town. It's not up to your neighbors. Right. So if the Grinch just wants to be left alone and doesn't like Christmas, it's not up to the Christmas carolers pentatonics chasing him down and making him do it. But that's not here either way. That's not the Grinch's background, and that's not Whoville's situation either. And I kind of wish there was more to Whoville in that way, just to, I don't know, add any kind of weight to the story. Also,
yeah, there needed to be something. Again, you cannot make a simple story longer without adding complexity to it. So to keep Whoville simple as it is in the first one and to not add anything, to actually take away from the personality of the Grinch, is to give yourself less content to work with over a longer time span.
Yeah. Also, just real quick, I'm going to digress. This isn't important at all. First, another defense of Whoville. I love how they decorate the tree. Like, every family made a giant ornament. That is so lovely. I
also appreciated that it wasn't like aesthetically designed. It wasn't one of those all gold.
No, not at all. They are not making a good argument against the commercialism of Christmas in this movie. It's very fun and very whimsical. The light maze is a little much, but again, that might just be Whoville. There's always someone who goes all out with the lights. However, I could not help but notice. Forgive me, Mac. The song choice for the carolers: "God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day." I question the implications of that. In Whoville, a universe that exists on a snowflake, is there Who Jesus? Because
No, you're right.
I'm not so much of a heathen that I don't forget the Christian connections to Christmas and all that. I get that, but there's also for the movies kind of the more just Santa commercial version of Christmas. But this implies who Jesus? What does that? What does that mean? Who is the savior of Whoville? Like, I just couldn't help but think about that since there's just so much emphasis on that song.
The only reason they picked it is because it's one of those. There's probably like 2 or 3 Christmas songs that are written in a minor key, therefore it can sound threatening. But you are right; it does narratively imply some things about religion in Whoville that had not existed before.
Yes. And then the ornament that Cindy Lou Who and her mom, it's an angel. So like there's 2 things there. So like what's Who heaven? What is Who hell? I'm so
Although
intrigued.
angels have become separated significantly from religion.
Fair. But with Christmas, I feel like it's safe to say here
You're also pictures of a nativity.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by what that could mean in this world. Beyond that though, I don't know. I think my head keeps swirling around how interesting this could have been without the neighbor story, or incorporating the neighbor story more so, but like amping up the Grinch's past and having him realize the friendship that was there and not taking advantage of it.
I think one of the things that bothered me most about the Fred story is, in my mind, first you have there are 2 characters in the Grinch. That's all there are. It's the Grinch and Cindy Lou Who. And you could argue Max, I guess, as well. Yeah. So maybe 3. In this version of the story, we do have Max, granted. And we actually see a kind of a lot of dynamics between Max and the Grinch in this film. Probably on par, if not maybe a little bit more than the other films. Then the second one you would think to bring in would be Cindy Lou Who. But they don't do that. They keep her very isolated for the entire film. So then you introduce this neighbor character who seems to be very interested in building a positive relationship with the Grinch, so much so that he's almost kind of delusional about the fact that the Grinch really doesn't like him. And you don't use that character because we don't need that character. We only need the sleigh on top of his house. Instead, what we're going to do to help the Grinch build relationships is bring in this random reindeer. Yeah. I don't like Fred. No.
I appreciate what you're saying. I don't know if when I just spoke, if you thought I said Fred, I said friend, but like you're right. Like I shouldn't be saying neighbor.
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Oh, okay, cool.
I think my solution would be to bring the neighbor in more.
Yes, do something more with the neighbor. We don't need Fred. Yeah. We don't need Fred at all. Not even a little bit.
Agreed. Yeah. Why introduce him if you're not going to use him?
I don't know.
Because he's kind of he's representative of Whoville to the Grinch. Sure, there's the body at large, there's the citizens of Whoville that he has to deal with, right? And everyone's more or less kind and considerate to him, nothing crazy. But, even the lady who he, takes the jar from and then breaks doesn't have a huge reaction about it. She's just disappointed. So the Who's in general are kind of indifferent towards the Grinch's negative attitude towards them. And this guy almost, doesn't mind it to the point where he enjoys spending time with the Grinch. And we don't use it at all to make the Grinch understand and appreciate relationships. Instead, it's this random little girl who he meets one time over Christmas while he's stealing Christmas, and then she invites him, which is very, that's in character for Cindy Lou Who. I don't really have a big issue with that. But, why did we do nothing with the neighbor guy? The neighbor guy is right there. Whatever.
Yeah. No, very, very much whatever, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what more there is to say. And again, I recall what I said at the beginning. It's a kids movie. It's colorful and fun enough that kids are going to like it.
The music's pretty good. It's not groundbreaking, but it's all right.
I like the score. Taking the Favu Dore, whatever, and turning it into a background soundtrack. I like that a lot. I don't like this version of You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch. I'm gonna sound like
Yeah.
an old man on my porch telling the kids to get off my lawn. I don't think everything needs to be like a hip hop rap kind of thing. I don't like this version just at all. Not even a little bit.
I kind of appreciate the fact that being a jazzy version of the song, the new modern version of that genre would be sort of like a hip hop sound, but it doesn't work as well, I don't think.
I think they could have gone full musical number with it. Cause like, isn't this the same studio that does Trolls, or is that Blue Sky? I can't remember. But you could have done
I
just
don't
something
know.
kind of fun and sparkly and silly with it. But like
Sure.
they tried to make it almost cool. This is not the cool version of the Grinch, you know, by far.
And the fun of the original Grinch story is that you actively dislike him. That entire song is incredibly insulting to the Grinch.
Yes.
And he embraces it, and you go, why? And then he has this change of heart, and it feels significant because you've fully accepted that the Grinch is like not a fun person to be around. And then he
Mhm.
changes, and you like that. Here, he's not a bad guy. He just has a weird hang up about Christmas that they then managed to make a plot out of somehow, kind of. It,
Yeah. I
it's
want to
fine.
see like a brief movie about like the Grinch or a Grinch equivalent. It's like, yeah, he hated Thanksgiving, and it's like no one cares. Who cares?
Hmm.
No one gives a shit. It's like, well, he hated Christmas. Like, well, that has to change. Can't let him not like Christmas.
Inexcusable.
Yeah. What a one to end on this year. My goodness.
Eh.
Eh, eh,
Do you
eh.
not like tearing movies apart?
I mean, it feels like kicking a child. It's a kids movie, you know, and a kids movie that
Mm,
wasn't trying to be good. Clearly, I mean, they're having
yeah.
fun and they're having artistic fun, and they're drawing more from the source material, which there isn't a lot of. You know, you can't remake the Jim
Hmm.
Carrey one, and I get that. You don't want to
Hmm.
just make the same thing. So they made just more of a kids version. They added more, you know, poetry with the narration, like more rhymes and
It
stuff.
wasn't as
No,
good.
it wasn't. But like they just they made more of the children's book. I wonder if when I want to give the movie the benefit of the doubt, I wonder if I am wrong in interpreting the Grinch, the OG Grinch, as terrifying a monster as he is. I'm wondering if less children these days, because of what they've grown up with, wouldn't even think of him as spooky or creepy. And he's just a silly guy akin to a Sesame Street monster. And so it makes more sense to make a more colorful cartoon continuation of him instead of what
You
we
know
ended
what?
up getting.
I put my foot down. The Grinch has to be a little bit scary. Like, I don't want it to be horror. I think that's wrong because horror films are about the deep-seated fears that we have. The
Hmm.
Grinch is a social monster in the sense that he's a Boo Radley, if you remember To Kill a Mockingbird from your school days.
Mm,
He's a character that exists to scare the children, POV, like the children characters,
right.
and he exists to scare them in the beginning so they learn to get over that fear so they can grow as people later in the story. It's supposed to be about how when you're a kid, some people and things sometimes look scary and sometimes are scary. Like the Grinch is not a kind dude, right? But it's about going through the process of confronting that fear and how do we handle that fear? How do we grow through that? The Grinch has a change of heart. He brings all the toys back. He's trying to redeem himself, and Whoville accepts him as a result. Like, you have to be scared of the Grinch in the beginning of the story in order for that lesson to really hit home. If he's
True.
just a generally disgruntled guy at the beginning and you don't really have any concerns or fears about him in the first place, then it doesn't really matter when he changes at the end because
Hmm.
you're not challenged. You stay more or less the same about the Grinch. You're like, okay, it's good that you're happy now. That's fine. But if
Right.
he's scary in the beginning and then he has a change of heart, you have to confront what your conception of him was before, even if it was true, so
Mm-hmm.
that you can accept the fact that he's changed. So if the Grinch isn't totally like, if the Grinch isn't at least a little bit scary in the beginning, it's not a Grinch story. It falls short of my expectations.
Fair, totally fair. I can appreciate that. I kind of realized something when I watched this the first time. I kind of backtracked on it a little bit, but especially because it's the same studio. I noticed that this movie is basically Despicable Me, and then I realized that Despicable Me is basically the Grinch because it's a evilish, mentally unstable guy who steals a thing whose heart is changed by a little girl. And it doesn't help
Mhm.
that Cindy Lou Who in this is basically a combination of Margot, Edith, and Agnes. Um, so at first I thought that hurt the Grinch. Then I realized that just hurts Despicable Me because Despicable Me is just the Grinch.
I guess, but I would
It's
argue that it's a good story still,
it's
and
an
therefore is not harm.
oversimplification. Yeah, but
Yeah, like sure you can argue that Gru is essentially a Grinch stereotype or archetype, maybe. He's from
mhm.
that same archetype, but I don't think that makes the story bad. That'd be like
I
saying that the Grinch and Alphaba are bad because they have the same, like in the
right.
live action one, they have the same
It's. I
story.
mean, I like the first Despicable Me, but I think it's funny to make that comparison and then point it out here because Gru is a better Grinch than this Grinch is a Grinch
Sure, sure.
because
I
he's like
agree.
actually problematic. He's actually evil.
Genuinely a
He,
little scary in the
yeah, a
beginning.
little. I mean, a little bit, or has the potential to be, and he
Mhm,
has a like more of an actual arc. So
mhm.
yeah, Illumination, you've made a successful borderline successful Grinch movie, just not the one that has Grinch in the title. So,
Yeah.
is it weird that
Oh,
of the movies they've made based on Dr. Seuss, the Lorax is the most successful one? I would say.
I think they owe that to catchy
Danny.
songs more than anything. I think people remember that film because of the music. Let It Die
I
impacted a
suppose.
generation.
Yeah, true. I think that the Lorax is pretty great though, just all things considered.
I do think it's
Um,
good. I'm not trying to slam it. I just think that its longevity has more to do with the sensationalism in its song than it has to do with anything else.
I suppose. I suppose. Fair enough. I would say though for this one, it's I don't know. If I'm looking at it as a kids movie, a kids Christmas movie, tis a whale, I guess. But like,
I would much rather show my kids the original.
well, yes, for sure. But looking at all of like the options for like a kids Christmas movie, I would sooner show them this than the Tim Allen Santa Claus, which I used to love. But like, I have no real reason at the end of the day to strongly dislike this movie. It's more of one I feel like I'm gonna just be indifferent of moving forward because the Grinch isn't Batman, Spider Man, Godzilla, or I don't know. It's another guy that gets rebooted over and over and over again. I don't really feel like making another movie on the Grinch hurts anything. It doesn't hurt the Grinch legacy. It doesn't take anything away from the Grinch. Jim Carrey's gonna have, a hold on that for as long as people have access to that movie. But
Yeah.
it's at the end of the day, it's just whatever. It's fine.
I would not call it a whale. I don't think it, even looking at it from a kid's perspective. I mean, let's even just look back at the Lorax. I just said the Lorax has a long-standing appeal because of its sensational songs, but even as I think about it, like they were selling air in the Lorax. That is a complex and dark theme for a
There's
kids film that
commentary.
they managed to pull off really well.
It's true.
Um, and it's good for kids. So like I
Okay.
think they could have done better with this.
Oh yeah,
I
maybe
put
I'll have
this
to
as
backtrack on that then.
passing. Yeah.
Gosh, what a year! What a year it's been.
A
We
year.
started with Indiana Jones and ended on
Mhm.
the Grinch.
That doesn't feel as far as apart as it probably should.
I don't know. I feel like it's pretty far apart. We did several marathons this year. We did Indiana Jones, Planet of the Apes, Terminator, the Beetlejuice. We did Nightmare Before Christmas. I feel like I'm forgetting one even.
Night in the Museum.
That's not out yet.
Oh, will be.
That comes out next
There you
week.
go, a little teaser
Little
for
teaser.
anyone who made it to the very end of this.
Yeah. I'm sure there's always someone at the end. No, there's not.
It's fine.
I do feel like
Just
it is hard. It is kind of hard to tell, like what has gone up and what, we've only watched. But I do feel like there was another little mini marathon in there or something. Let me check on it real quick. Nope. Apes. Nope. That's all. That's all of them. But that is, I think.
Terminator for a long time because they're long franchises.
That's true. And there's 9 Apes movies, so that went on for a long time.
Yeah.
But that's that'll be 27 videos. That's half a year. My gosh, look at us go.
And this is like when we started recording. If you want to include all the Disney live action stuff that we did before, we've been going
consistent
with this
for
a while.
over a year. We've been consistent with this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we've got quite the plan for the first half of next year, and I am really hoping nothing uproots it because I like this schedule.
This has been fun. I like it quite a bit.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I wonder what our channel will look like a year from now.
We'll have less viewers.
Less viewers, less subscribers. Right now, we're sitting at a cool 22, which is more than I honestly thought we'd have within 6 months. So
I assume that people are clicking the subscribe button either by accident or just sort of like they're the kind of people that just subscribe to everything for some reason. There are 22 of those people out there.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna say by end of year next year, the end of 2025, we will have 75 subscribers.
I think based off the rate, we could have more. We could have more than that.
We roughly get one a week. And there's 27 videos, there's 22 subscribers. So I feel like when you add the additional 52, 75 is already optimistic. So you going above that, that's impressive. That's a lot of hope.
I don't know. I'm an ambitious person. I go for it.
Yeah, you really do. But I think that's where we're at. Thanks for no one's here. Thanks for not listening. This has been fun. We're gonna keep doing it. I've enjoyed it.
It's been a year. It's been in December.
It has been in December. It has.
But 2025 is coming. The new calendar.
Yay.
Fresh pages.
Yay.
We can do it.
Yep.
We can do it.
All right. Bye, everyone.